The arrival of the fleet. In the vast silence of space, a ripple tore through the darkness. One after another, massive human supercarriers emerged from hyperspace. Each was a colossal fortress, bristling with weapons, shining like titans in the starlight. Their black hulls carried the symbol of Earth, a blue and green globe surrounded by a wreath of stars. There were 200 of them, lined up in perfect formation, spreading out across the void like an unstoppable wave. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of Eternal Resolve, the flagship of the fleet. His gray eyes were cold, calculating, as he watched the other ships align into position. Behind him, officers moved with purpose, their faces showing both determination and the weight of the moment. They knew this mission would define the future of humanity. A low hum filled the air as the ship's main comm system activated. Kane stepped forward, gripping the edge of the console. His voice, steady and commanding, echoed across the fleet and into the alien communication networks. "This is Admiral Kane of the United Terran Federation," he began, his words sharp as blades. "To the Zarkian Empire, your time of dominance is over. We are here to take back what is ours. Surrender now, or face the consequences." Far away in the grand palace of the Zarkian Empress, his message caused chaos. The Empress, a towering figure with shimmering golden skin and eyes like burning coals, slammed her clawed hand onto her throne's armrest. Her voice was a mix of fury and disbelief. "How dare they?" she hissed, her sharp teeth bared. Her generals, standing in a half-circle before her, looked uneasy. No one had ever spoken to the Zarkian Empire with such defiance. For centuries, they had ruled this corner of the galaxy. They had enslaved weaker species, including humans, treating them as tools for their empire's expansion. But something had changed. Humans, once scattered and weak, had built an armada unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The size of the fleet alone was alarming, but the Zarkians knew little about the weapons humanity had hidden on board. Spies had tried to gather intelligence, but humanity's newfound secrecy had been impenetrable. "Send our fleets," the Empress ordered, her voice icy. "Crush them before they dare set foot on our territory." Her generals hesitated. "Your Majesty," one of them began cautiously, "these supercarriers. Their technology is unlike anything we have encountered. It may be wise to assess their capabilities before engaging." The Empress glared at him, her fiery eyes narrowing. "You think I fear them?" she snapped. "Humanity was nothing but a pest we tolerated. If they wish to play war, we will show them what happens to those who defy us." Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kane watched as the fleet advanced into Zarkian-controlled space. The ships moved like a single organism, precise and disciplined. Each supercarrier was accompanied by smaller escort ships, their sleek designs hiding devastating firepower. "Admiral," a young officer called out, her voice filled with tension. "Zarkian ships detected on the long-range scanners. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to Commander Vance, his second in command. "Deploy the scout drones. I want full visibility of their fleet. No surprises." Vance saluted sharply. "Yes, sir." The drones shot out from the carriers, tiny blips of light speeding into the distance. The main display screen on the bridge lit up with real-time data as the drones scanned the approaching enemy fleet. The Zarkian ships were fast and heavily armed, their formations designed to overwhelm and intimidate. "They're bringing destroyers and battlecruisers," Vance observed, "but no sign of dreadnoughts yet." Kane frowned slightly. "They're testing us. They want to see what we're capable of." The bridge fell silent as the crew waited for Kane's next command. He took a deep breath, his mind racing through strategies. Humanity couldn't afford to falter now. Every decision he made could mean the difference between victory and extinction. "Prepare all fighters," he ordered. "We'll meet their first wave head-on. No retreat." The officers moved quickly, relaying the commands to the other ships. In the hangars of the supercarriers, hundreds of sleek starfighters roared to life, their engines glowing as pilots strapped in. Many of these pilots were young, barely out of training, but their eyes burned with resolve. They knew what was at stake. As the Zarkian fleet drew closer, the tension aboard the Eternal Resolve was palpable. Kane stood at the center of it all, his calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions within. He thought of Earth, of the billions of lives depending on this mission. The Zarkians had underestimated humanity for too long. Today, they would learn the true strength of the human spirit. The countdown to the first clash began. The alien ships appeared on the screen, growing larger as they approached. The crew held their breath, waiting for the battle to begin. And then, with a flash of light, the first Zarkian missiles streaked through space toward the human fleet. "Shields up," Kane barked. "All ships, engage." The supercarriers opened fire, their massive cannons unleashing beams of energy that lit up the void. Fighters launched from the hangars, swarming like angry hornets, intercepting the Zarkian missiles and countering with their own weapons. The battle had begun. Humanity's hidden strength. The flickering light of explosions lit up the void as the human fleet held its ground against the first wave of Zarkian attackers. The Eternal Resolve shook slightly as a stray missile grazed its shields, but the ship stood firm, its weapon systems firing relentlessly. Despite the chaos outside, Admiral Kane remained calm, his sharp eyes studying the battle on the tactical display. The Zarkian destroyers were fast, darting around the human supercarriers like wolves circling a herd. But Kane knew better than to underestimate their speed. He had prepared for this moment for years, knowing it would come. "Phase 2, Kane ordered, his voice steady. From the carriers, small metallic orbs shot out in all directions. These were automated drones, an invention humanity had kept hidden from the galaxy. Equipped with advanced AI and deadly precision, they moved like a swarm of mechanical insects, overwhelming the Zarkian ships with their speed and adaptability. On the Zarkian flagship, panic was spreading. Commander Thrax, a seasoned warrior, struggled to maintain order. "They're drones. They're everywhere. Our targeting systems can't keep up." In the heart of the Zarkian Empire, the Empress sat on her gilded throne, watching a live feed of the battle. Her golden skin shimmered under the light of the holographic display. She clenched her fists, her fiery eyes narrowing as she watched her destroyers falter. "Impossible," she muttered. "Humans were scavengers, weaklings. How did they create such technology?" The truth was hidden deep within the asteroid belts of Sol, where humanity had been preparing for this day in secret. After centuries of oppression and humiliation at the hands of the Zarkians, the people of Earth had united. Old rivalries were set aside, and resources were pooled to create the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. Flashback: humanity's preparation. Years earlier, Admiral Kane stood in the depths of a hidden facility carved into an asteroid. Rows of scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, creating weapons and ships beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. The air was thick with purpose, every individual driven by the same goal: survival. "This is our last chance," Kane had told them. "If we fail, humanity will never rise again." The most brilliant minds on Earth had come together for this project. They developed new forms of energy shields, faster hyperspace drives, and weapons capable of disintegrating entire squadrons. But their greatest achievement was the fleet of supercarriers, each one a mobile fortress, housing not just weapons, but also entire ecosystems to support extended missions. Kane's most trusted ally, Dr. Eleanor Voss, had led the development of the drones now wreaking havoc on the Zarkian fleet. She was a quiet but determined woman, with a mind as sharp as any weapon. "They'll underestimate us," she had said during one of their late-night planning sessions. "The Zarkians see us as inferior. Let that arrogance be their downfall." Back to the battle. As the drones tore through the Zarkian destroyers, the tide of the battle began to shift. The supercarriers advanced, their massive guns unleashing wave after wave of destruction. Zarkian ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, leaving the survivors scrambling to regroup. "Admiral," Commander Vance reported, "the first wave is breaking apart. Their destroyers are retreating." Kane nodded but didn't relax. He knew the Zarkians were testing them, trying to learn their weaknesses. The real threat hadn't arrived yet. "Order all ships to hold position," Kane said. "We're not chasing them. Let them run back to their Empress and tell her what they've seen." On the Zarkian flagship, Commander Threx stared at the retreating human fleet in disbelief. "They're holding back," he muttered. He didn't realize it yet, but Kane's strategy was already working. By revealing only part of humanity's strength, the Admiral was planting seeds of doubt and fear in the minds of their enemies. A mysterious message. As the crew of the Eternal Resolve worked to repair minor damages, a sudden alert sounded. A holographic screen lit up on the bridge, displaying a strange signal. It was faint, almost garbled, but it was coming from deep within Zarkian space. "Admiral," said the communications officer, "we've intercepted a message. It's encrypted, but it seems to be addressed to us." Kane frowned. "From the Zarkians?" The officer shook his head. "No, sir. It doesn't match their codes." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Kane's response. "Decode it," he said finally. "Let's see what they're trying to tell us." Minutes later, the message played. A distorted voice spoke in a language no one recognized, but the tone was clear, urgency and warning. Alongside the voice, fragments of an image appeared. A vast Zarkian dreadnought, larger than anything humanity had encountered before. Kane's jaw tightened. This was the true threat. The Empress hadn't just sent her fleet to test humanity. She was buying time to unleash something far more dangerous. Cliffhanger. On the Zarkian throne world, the Empress watched the transmission with a cruel smile. She had sent the message herself, a calculated move to test humanity's resolve. "Let them come," she whispered. "They haven't seen the full might of the Zarkian Empire." Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kane stared at the holographic image of the dreadnought. His crew waited for his orders, their faces pale but determined. "Prepare the fleet," Kane said, his voice firm. "We've only just begun." The Empress strikes back. The Zarkian dreadnought loomed in the distance, a monstrous silhouette against the stars. It was a floating fortress, dwarfing even humanity's supercarriers. Its hull shimmered with layers of adaptive shielding, and massive energy cannons lined its sides, capable of obliterating anything in their path. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, studying the holographic projection of the dreadnought. His officers were silent, their tension palpable. The intercepted message had confirmed their fears. This wasn't just a war for dominance. It was a battle for survival. "Admiral," Commander Vance said, breaking the silence, "the dreadnought is deploying escorts. Hundreds of them. They'll intercept us in less than an hour." Kane nodded, his face grim. "They're trying to funnel us into a kill zone. Typical Zarkian strategy." "What's the plan, sir?" Vance asked, his voice steady despite the odds. Kane didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, calculating risks and possibilities. Then he turned to the tactical officer. "Send a pulse to the fleet. Tighten formation. I want our supercarriers in a defensive wall. No ship breaks ranks." The Zarkian counterattack. As the human fleet repositioned itself, the first wave of Zarkian escorts arrived. These ships were smaller and faster than the human supercarriers, their sleek designs optimized for hit-and-run tactics. They swarmed toward the human formation, firing bursts of plasma that lit up the void. "Shields holding at 85%, a tactical officer reported, her voice calm but strained. "Drones are engaging." The automated drones launched again, their coordinated attacks overwhelming the Zarkian escorts. But the aliens had adapted. This time, the Zarkians deployed electronic warfare ships, scrambling the drones' targeting systems. On the bridge of a Zarkian cruiser, Commander Threx watched with satisfaction as human drones veered off course, colliding with one another. Humans rely too much on their machines, he sneered. Let's see how they fare without them. Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kane quickly assessed the situation. Deploy countermeasures, he ordered. Flood the area with ion bursts. I want those jammers neutralized. The supercarriers unleashed waves of ion energy, short-circuiting the Zarkian jammers. The drones recalibrated almost instantly, resuming their deadly assault. Zarkian ships began to fall again, explosions ripping through their formations. A dangerous gambit. Despite their success, Kane knew this was only a distraction. The real threat was the dreadnought, which remained motionless in the distance, as if taunting them. Its escorts were thinning, but the monster itself hadn't fired a single shot. Why aren't they engaging? Vance wondered aloud. What are they waiting for? Kane's eyes narrowed. They're testing us. They want to see how far we'll go before they unleash that thing. The Admiral leaned forward, his voice low and decisive. Send a strike team. I want a small group of our fastest ships to approach the dreadnought. Test its defenses. Vance hesitated. That's a suicide mission, sir. I know, Kane replied, his tone heavy. But we need intel. If we don't understand what we're up against, this fleet won't survive. Reluctantly, Vance relayed the orders. 3 corvettes broke away from the main fleet, their engines glowing brightly as they raced toward the dreadnought. The crew watched in silence as the tiny ships approached the monstrous vessel. The dreadnought remained still at first, its shields shimmering faintly. Then, without warning, a massive energy cannon fired. The beam was so intense it lit up the entire battlefield, vaporizing the corvettes in an instant. The crew of the Eternal Resolve stared in horror as the light faded, leaving only debris where the ships had been. By the stars, Vance whispered. That thing, it's unstoppable. The Empress's trap. In her grand throne room, the Zarkian Empress observed the battle with satisfaction. Her golden skin glowed in the dim light of the holographic display. Beside her, her advisors whispered nervously, but she silenced them with a wave of her clawed hand. They are brave, she admitted, a cruel smile spreading across her face. But bravery will not save them. She turned to one of her generals. Activate the minefield. Herd them into position. The general bowed and relayed the command. Hidden mines, cloaked by advanced Zarkian technology, activated across the battlefield. Slowly, they began to converge on the human fleet, creating an invisible barrier. Back on the Eternal Resolve, the sensors picked up strange energy readings. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, we're detecting anomalies surrounding our position. They're closing in. Kane's face darkened. Mines. They're boxing us in. What do we do? Vance asked. For a moment, Kane didn't respond. Then, a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. We punch through. Humanity's counterstrike. Kane turned to his crew, his voice steady and commanding. All ships prepare for a concentrated assault. Target the weakest point in their formation and break through. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. The fleet shifted again, the supercarriers aligning their massive cannons toward a narrow gap in the Zarkian lines. Fighters launched from their hangars, providing cover for the carriers as they moved. Fire everything we've got, Kane ordered. The human fleet unleashed a devastating barrage of energy beams and missiles. The gap widened as Zarkian ships fell, their hulls torn apart by the relentless assault. The mines, unable to keep up with the fleet's speed, began to fall behind. Cliffhanger. As the human fleet broke through the trap, the dreadnought finally began to move. Its engines roared to life, and the monstrous ship turned to face the escaping humans. Admiral, Vance said, his voice tight with fear, the dreadnought is advancing. Kane stared at the massive vessel, his jaw clenched. Good, he said. Let it come. We'll show them what humanity is truly capable of. The crew braced themselves as the dreadnought's energy cannons began to glow. signaling the start of the true battle. Humanity's unbreakable spirit. The dreadnought moved like a predator through space, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the battlefield. Its energy cannons, now fully charged, began to pulse with a sinister red glow. The human fleet, still regrouping after breaking through the minefield, faced its greatest challenge yet. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. The dreadnought was advancing steadily, its weapons locking onto the heart of the human formation. "Admiral," Commander Vance said, his voice tense, "their main cannon will be in range in 2 minutes." Kane's mind raced. He knew the fleet couldn't withstand a direct hit from the dreadnought's primary weapon. It was a planet killer, designed to obliterate anything in its path. Retreat wasn't an option. They had come too far, and Earth was counting on them. "Launch the Valkyrie Squadron," Kane ordered, "and prepare the resolute spear." The Valkyrie Squadron. Deep within the hangars of the Eternal Resolve, a group of elite pilots prepared for their mission. Known as the Valkyrie Squadron, they were humanity's best. Daring, highly skilled, and willing to impossible impossible odds. Lieutenant Mira Harlow, the squadron leader, strapped herself into her sleek fighter. Her call sign, Valkyrie 1, was painted boldly on the side of her cockpit. She glanced at her team, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "This is it," she said over the comms. "We're the tip of the spear. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out alive." The fighters launched in unison, their engines roaring as they streaked toward the dreadnought. They flew in a tight formation, weaving through the chaos of the battlefield. The Zarkian defenses quickly reacted, unleashing waves of plasma fire and missile swarms. "Evasive maneuvers," Mira shouted. Her squadron split into pairs, dodging the incoming fire with practiced precision. Despite their agility, 2 fighters were hit, their explosions lighting up the void. Mira clenched her teeth but didn't falter. "Keep going. We're almost there." The resolute spear. Back on the Eternal Resolve, preparations for a desperate gambit were underway. The resolute spear, a prototype weapon hidden within the flagship, was humanity's ultimate trump card. Designed to pierce even the most advanced shields, it was a kinetic missile tipped with a rare element known as trionium. Its activation required immense energy and precision. "Admiral, the resolute spear is ready," a weapons officer reported. "But we'll only get 1 shot." Kane nodded. "We'll make it count." The plan was simple but dangerous. The Valkyrie Squadron would create a distraction, drawing the dreadnought's fire and exposing a critical weak point. Once the weak point was identified, the resolute spear would be fired. "Timing is everything," Kane said. "We won't get another chance." The dreadnought's wrath. As the Valkyrie Squadron closed in, the dreadnought unleashed its full fury. Massive energy cannons fired in all directions, creating waves of destruction. Mira's fighter shook violently as she dodged a blast, her HUD flashing red. "Target their shield generators," she ordered. "We need to create an opening." The squadron focused their fire on the dreadnought's massive shield emitters, located along its hull. Their attacks were relentless, but the shields held firm. Inside the dreadnought, Zarkian engineers scrambled to reinforce the shields. The Empress, watching from her throne room, was livid. "Destroy them," she roared. "I want every human ship obliterated." A hero's sacrifice. The Valkyrie Squadron continued their assault, but their numbers were dwindling. Mira's fighter was hit, alarms blaring as smoke filled her cockpit. Despite the damage, she pushed forward, determined to complete the mission. "Admiral," Mira said over the comms, her voice strained, "we've exposed a weak point near their aft engines, but I can't hold them off much longer." Kane's voice came through, calm and resolute. "You've done enough, Lieutenant. Get out of there." Mira hesitated, then shook her head. "Negative, sir. I'm finishing this." With her fighter badly damaged, Mira locked onto the weak point and accelerated. For Earth, She whispered as her fighter collided with the dreadnought in a fiery explosion. The impact destabilized the shields, creating a brief but critical opening. The resolute spear fires. "Fire the resolute spear," Kane commanded. The eternal resolve shuddered as the massive kinetic missile launched from its underside. It streaked toward the dreadnought, its trionium tip glowing with energy. The Zarkians scrambled to intercept it, but their defenses were too slow. The missile struck the weak point with devastating force, piercing the dreadnought's hull and detonating deep within. The explosion was massive, ripping through the ship's core. One by one, the dreadnought's systems failed, and the once mighty vessel began to collapse. On board the Eternal Resolve, cheers erupted as the dreadnought exploded in a brilliant flash of light. But Kane remained stoic, his gaze fixed on the debris. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The Empress won't stop here." Cliffhanger. As the human fleet regrouped, a new signal appeared on the sensors. It was coming from deep within Zarkian space, larger than anything they had encountered before. Kane stared at the data, his jaw tightening. "What now?" Vance asked. The Admiral's voice was steady but heavy with resolve. "Prepare the fleet. The real fight is about to begin." The Empress's desperation. The glow of the destroyed dreadnought's wreckage had barely faded when the Zarkian Empress unleashed her next move. From her grand throne room, surrounded by her advisors, she watched the human fleet with a mixture of rage and calculated malice. "They've destroyed one dreadnought," she hissed, her voice cold as ice. "But they haven't faced the full strength of the Empire." One of her advisors, trembling under her glare, spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, the humans' technology is more advanced than we anticipated. Perhaps we should." Silence. The Empress roared, her fiery eyes blazing. "I will not cower before these vermin. Activate the Doomsday Fleet. They will see what true power looks like." The Doomsday Fleet emerges. Back on the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kane was reviewing sensor data when a new alert sounded. The tactical display lit up, showing an incoming fleet. It wasn't just a fleet. It was an armada. Thousands of ships of varying sizes were converging on their position. Leading them were two dreadnought-class vessels, each more massive than the one they had just destroyed. The bridge fell silent as the enormity of the threat became clear. Commander Vance broke the silence, his voice heavy with disbelief. That's the Doomsday Fleet." Kane's jaw tightened. "So, the Empress has decided to play her final card." The Doomsday Fleet wasn't just a collection of warships. It was a mobile invasion force, carrying enough firepower to wipe out entire civilizations. Its two dreadnoughts were equipped with planet-cracking cannons, and its smaller ships carried legions of Zarkian ground troops. "Admiral," the tactical officer said, her voice trembling, "they'll be in firing range in 20 minutes. Kane turned to his crew, his voice steady. "We've faced impossible odds before. This is no different. Ready the fleet. The battle for survival." As the Doomsday Fleet closed in, humanity's supercarriers moved into a tight defensive formation. Kane had ordered every weapon system online, every fighter prepped, and every drone armed for maximum destruction. The first wave of Zarkian ships hit like a tidal wave. Fighters swarmed the human fleet, engaging in dogfights with humanity's elite pilots. The supercarriers' massive guns fired relentlessly, lighting up the void with bursts of energy. On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, Kane watched the battle unfold. "Target their command ships," he ordered. "If we can disrupt their chain of command, we'll slow them down." The fleet's long-range cannons adjusted their aim, unleashing devastating salvos at the Zarkian command vessels. One by one, the enemy ships were hit, their explosions rippling through the battlefield. But the Zarkians were relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. The Empress's secret weapon. Just as the human fleet began to push back the first wave, the two dreadnoughts moved into position. Their energy cannons began to glow, charging for a devastating attack. On board the Zarkian flagship, The Empress smiled cruelly. Humans are resourceful, but they lack the strength to endure. Let us show them the cost of defiance. The dreadnoughts fired their planet-cracking cannons in unison. Massive beams of energy streaked toward the human fleet, carving through the void like fiery spears. Evasive maneuvers, Kane shouted. The human fleet scattered, but 2 supercarriers were caught in the blast. Their shields collapsed, and the ships disintegrated in seconds. The loss sent a ripple of grief and anger through the fleet, but Kane remained focused. We need to neutralize those dreadnoughts, he said. They're too powerful to ignore. A bold plan. With the dreadnoughts wreaking havoc, Kane devised a desperate strategy. He called for a small task force to infiltrate the lead dreadnought and disable its main cannon from within. It was a high-risk plan, but it was the only way to even the odds. We'll need volunteers, Kane said. Commander Vance stepped forward immediately. I'll lead the mission, sir. Kane placed a hand on Vance's shoulder. Be careful out there. The fleet depends on you. The task force, composed of elite Marines and engineers, boarded a stealth frigate and launched toward the dreadnought. As they approached, the main battle raged on, with the human fleet holding the line against overwhelming odds. The infiltration. The stealth frigate slipped past the dreadnought's outer defenses, its cloaking system masking its approach. Once on board, the team moved quickly, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the massive ship. Vance led the way, his pulse rifle at the ready. The team encountered heavy resistance, but their training and determination carried them through. They reached the control room for the main cannon, where a fierce firefight broke out. We need to plant the charges, Vance shouted over the chaos. Engineers worked frantically, setting explosive devices around the cannon's energy core. Suddenly, an alarm blared. Reinforcements were closing in. Vance knew they were out of time. Detonate the charges and get out of here, he ordered. The engineers hesitated. But what about you, Commander? Vance shook his head. Go. I'll hold them off. A hero's legacy. As the team retreated, Vance held his ground, buying them precious time. He fought with everything he had, knowing he wouldn't make it out alive. When the charges detonated, the dreadnought's main cannon was destroyed in a massive explosion, crippling the ship. The remaining human fleet rallied, inspired by the sacrifice of Vance and his team. The destruction of the dreadnought created a turning point in the battle. Humanity had taken a heavy blow, but they weren't beaten yet. Cliffhanger. Back in her throne room, the Empress received the news of the dreadnought's destruction. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. These humans, she murmured, they are far more dangerous than I imagined. She turned to her generals. Prepare the final weapon. If they will not bow, they will burn. On the eternal resolve, Kane stood on the bridge, his expression grim but determined. The battle was far from over, and he knew the Empress still had cards to play. Prepare the fleet, he said. This isn't just a fight for survival. This is a fight for humanity's future. The final battle. The void of space was littered with the wreckage of both Zarkian and human ships, a grim testament to the ferocity of the conflict. Yet the battle was far from over. On board the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kane stood at the center of a maelstrom of activity. Officers relayed orders, tactical displays flickered with incoming data, and the faint hum of the ship's engines filled the air. Admiral, the second dreadnought is moving into position. Commander Vance's interim replacement, Lieutenant Rhea Torres, reported. Her voice was steady, but her clenched fists betrayed her nerves. It's charging its main weapon. Kane studied the holographic projection of the battlefield. The remaining Zarkian dreadnought was flanked by waves of smaller ships, forming an impenetrable wall of firepower. Humanity's fleet had taken severe losses, but their resolve remained unshaken. Send the vanguard and Nova strike to flank their formation, Kane ordered. Draw their fire. We'll engage the dreadnought head-on. The Empress's Gambit. On the Zarkian flagship, the Empress watched the battle unfold with cold fury. Her golden skin shimmered under the eerie glow of tactical holograms. Despite her losses, she still exuded an aura of unshakable confidence. "Deploy the catalyst," she commanded. Her generals exchanged uneasy glances. The catalyst was an experimental superweapon, a last resort designed to destabilize entire star systems. Its use would not only obliterate the human fleet, but also destroy the surrounding space, leaving a scar in the galaxy. "But, Your Majesty," one general ventured cautiously, "activating the catalyst here will." "I said deploy it." The Empress snapped, her fiery eyes blazing. Humanity must learn the cost of defiance. A massive structure detached from the underbelly of the remaining dreadnought. It was unlike anything the human fleet had seen before. A cylindrical weapon brimming with unstable energy, its surface crackling with bolts of electricity. The catalyst's core began to glow, a menacing red that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. A desperate plan. The catalyst appeared on the Eternal Resolve's tactical display, its energy readings spiking dangerously. Kane's eyes narrowed as he realized the Zarkians' intentions. "They're planning to destroy the entire system," he said grimly. "If that thing detonates, it'll create a chain reaction that will wipe out everything, including their own fleet." Lieutenant Torres stared at him in shock. They'd sacrificed themselves. Kane's voice was steady but cold. The Empress would rather burn the galaxy than admit defeat. Silence fell over the bridge as the weight of the situation sank in. Then Kane spoke, his tone resolute. "We're not letting that happen. Prepare for a full-scale assault on the catalyst." The assault begins. Humanity's fleet surged forward, a battered yet unyielding force. Fighters swarmed the catalyst, their pilots weaving through torrents of Zarkian fire. The supercarriers unleashed devastating salvos, targeting the weapon's protective shielding. Inside the catalyst, Zarkian engineers worked feverishly to stabilize the weapon's core. The device was dangerously unstable, and the humans' relentless assault was making their task nearly impossible. "Admiral," an officer reported, "we've identified weak points in the catalyst structure. If we can breach its core, we might be able to trigger a controlled collapse." Kane nodded. "Relay the coordinates to the fleet. All ships, focus fire on those weak points." The catalyst fights back. As the human fleet concentrated its fire on the catalyst, the weapon unleashed its own defenses. Massive energy beams arced across the battlefield, slicing through anything in their path. One of humanity's supercarriers, the Iron Resolve, took a direct hit, splitting apart in a fiery explosion. On the Eternal Resolve, the crew felt the shockwave from the blast. The loss of the Iron Resolve was a devastating blow, but Kane's expression remained unreadable. "Keep firing," he ordered. "We can't let up." A reckless sacrifice. Despite their efforts, the catalyst's core continued to charge, its energy readings climbing dangerously high. Time was running out. Lieutenant Torres turned to Kane, her voice quiet but firm. "Admiral, there's only one way to stop it. We need to detonate the core from the inside." Kane understood what she was saying. It was a suicide mission. But there was no other choice. "I'll go," Torres said before Kane could respond. "This was my mentor's fleet. It's my duty." Kane hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Take the Phoenix Wing. You'll need a fighter fast enough to evade their defenses." The final push. Torres boarded the Phoenix Wing, a state-of-the-art fighter designed for speed and agility. As she approached the catalyst, the human fleet provided cover, drawing fire away from her. Inside the catalyst, Zarkian engineers detected her approach. "A human ship is heading for the core," one shouted. The Empress, watching from her flagship, snarled. "Stop her." Zarkian fighters swarmed toward Torres, but she maneuvered with unmatched skill, weaving through their attacks. As she reached the core chamber, she armed the fighter's payload, a high-yield explosive designed for maximum impact. "This is for everyone we've lost," Torres whispered. She fired the payload into the core and accelerated away. But the explosion was faster. The catalyst erupted in a blinding flash, its energy collapsing inward before dissipating into the void. Cliffhanger. The battlefield fell silent as the catalyst's remains drifted through space. The Zarkian fleet, leaderless and disoriented, began to retreat. On the eternal resolve, Kane stood silently, mourning Torres's sacrifice. But his moment of reflection was interrupted by an incoming transmission. It was from deep within Zarkian space, an ominous signal carrying the simple message: "The Vanguard awakens." Kane's expression hardened. "Prepare the fleet. This war is far from over. Humanity asserts dominance." The silence following the destruction of the catalyst was brief. The human fleet, battered but triumphant, regrouped under the command of Admiral Kane aboard the Eternal Resolve. Wreckage from the battle floated like silent witnesses, and the void was thick with the unspoken weight of those lost. But there was no time to mourn. The Vanguard awakens. The mysterious message, "The Vanguard awakens," had sent chills through the fleet. Kane's tactical officers worked furiously to decrypt its origins, piecing together fragmented data from the Zarkian networks. "Admiral," an officer reported, her voice grave, "we've identified the source of the signal. It's coming from the Zarkian homeworld." Kane frowned, leaning closer to the tactical display. The Zarkian homeworld, Zarkith Prime, was a heavily fortified planet, a bastion of alien dominance for centuries. No fleet had ever dared approach it. "What is the Vanguard?" Lieutenant Rhea Torres's interim replacement asked cautiously. Kane's expression was grim. "If I had to guess, it's their final line of defense, a weapon or force so powerful they've only kept it as a last resort." The room fell silent, the implications clear. The Zarkians wouldn't summon the Vanguard unless they were desperate. Humanity pushes forward. Kane stood and addressed the fleet over the comms. His voice was calm but laced with the steel of conviction. "We've fought harder and lost more than we ever thought possible," he said, "but we've proven one thing: humanity doesn't back down. If the Zarkians want to end this war with their so-called Vanguard, we'll face it head-on. This ends here." Across the fleet, tired but determined faces nodded as the message played. Humanity's survival hinged on this final battle. The order was given. The fleet prepared for hyperspace travel to Zarkith Prime. Engineers scrambled to repair damage from the last battle, pilots rearmed their fighters, and the crew braced themselves for the unknown. Zarkith Prime. The Vanguard revealed. When the human fleet exited hyperspace, the sight of Zarkith Prime was breathtaking. The planet was a swirling mix of golden clouds and bright green oceans, its orbit surrounded by enormous rings of debris. But it was what hovered above the planet that stole the breath of every human aboard the fleet. The Vanguard. It was a massive construct, larger than any dreadnought or supercarrier. It wasn't just a ship, it was a living weapon. Its structure pulsed with energy, its outer shell shifting like liquid metal. Surrounding it were smaller ships, acting as its guardians. On the Zarkian flagship, the Empress watched with satisfaction as the Vanguard activated. "They think they've won," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "They haven't even begun to suffer." The Vanguard released a shockwave of energy that rippled through space, disabling several human ship shields and leaving them vulnerable. A battle for the ages. Kane reacted instantly. Engage evasive maneuvers. Protect the fleet at all costs. The battle began. The Vanguard unleashed devastating energy beams that arced across the battlefield, striking human ships with pinpoint accuracy. Supercarriers fired back, their combined firepower focused on the Vanguard, but its liquid metal exterior absorbed the attacks, redirecting the energy into its own weapons. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres' replacement called out, "our weapons aren't making a dent. It's adapting to everything we throw at it." Kane's mind raced. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The Vanguard was a force of nature, a culmination of Zarkian ingenuity and desperation, a hidden weakness. As the battle raged, one of the fleet's science officers made a breakthrough. "Admiral," she said, her voice urgent, "we've detected a fluctuation in its energy core. It's overloading itself to maintain its adaptive shields. If we can force it to divert more energy, we might be able to collapse its core." Kane nodded. "Relay that to the fleet. Focus all firepower on its central structure. Force it to react." The fleet concentrated its attacks on a single point, overwhelming the Vanguard's adaptive systems. Slowly, cracks began to form in its liquid metal shell. But the Vanguard fought back with even greater ferocity, firing a massive energy blast that ripped through the human formation. The final blow. Kane knew the fleet couldn't survive much longer. He made a fateful decision. Prepare the eternal resolve for a collision course with the Vanguard. The bridge fell silent. "Sir, you can't mean..." Torres's replacement began. "I do," Kane said firmly. "If we don't stop it now, there won't be anything left to save." The eternal resolve powered up its engines, charging straight toward the Vanguard. Kane turned to his crew. "You've served humanity with honor. Evacuate the ship. That's an order." The crew protested, but Kane's resolve was unshakable. Reluctantly, they followed his command, boarding escape shuttles as the flagship raced toward its target. A hero's sacrifice. Kane stood alone on the bridge, watching the Vanguard grow larger on the view screen. He activated the ship's remaining weapons, firing relentlessly at the weakened core. "This is for Earth," he said quietly, just as the eternal resolve collided with the Vanguard. The explosion was cataclysmic. The Vanguard's core detonated, sending shockwaves through space that obliterated the surrounding Zarkian fleet. The remaining human ships braced against the blast, their shields flickering but holding. Humanity prevails. When the dust settled, the Zarkian forces were in full retreat. Their empire, once unshakable, was crumbling. The destruction of the Vanguard marked the end of their dominance. Back on Earth, the surviving fleet returned to a hero's welcome. Statues were erected in honor of Kane and the countless others who had given their lives for humanity's survival. The phrase "humanity endures" became a rallying cry, a testament to their unyielding spirit. Epilogue. A new era. In the shadows of the victory, a human scientist studied fragments of the Vanguard's technology. A faint signal pulsed within the wreckage, a warning or perhaps a beacon. As humanity celebrated, a new question loomed. What else lay hidden in the depths of the galaxy, waiting to be awakened?